Before we go to the post game, we actually have another interview for everybody, one that I'm really excited to share with y'all. It's a conversation that I had with Bob Libal, who is running here in Travis County for the Travis County Commission spot, I believe in District 2, which might sound like a little bit of an obscure office, but it is essentially like, the kind of broad strokes version of it is that it is like the city council for Travis County. And this really, really matters for people who live here, but also for everyone else, because as much as it drives me crazy, the rich and powerful have a serious interest in this part of Texas, and they are coming here in droves. And we need to have people in government who are looking out for the people in this community, and also making sure that those companies follow kind of basic safety practices, et cetera, that they're trying to come here to avoid. They think they can come to Texas so that they don't have to look out for consumer rights or for their workers or pay taxes. So we'll get into that in this conversation. But I did just want to share very briefly with folks as we bring it up. I think people from here know about it, but if you're not from the area, you might not know about Tesla moved their huge gigafactory to Austin, where they're going to be building their cyber trucks. I don't understand the attraction to those. I can at least, we've criticized the Teslas in general, but I can at least sort of get it. Why you would want to drive those trucks around, I don't get. They look terrible. But anyway, that's not the focus of this.
Have they updated it at all? Yeah, I guess it's not. But no, I mean, it still looks like a car from like a Nintendo 64 game. Like you don't have enough like fucking polygons. But anyway, go ahead.
But anyways, they came here and they're building this huge factory here, and this is not a unique thing to Austin, but they got a ridiculous and, in my opinion, criminal deal when it comes to the taxes that they should be paying. So I've read actually like much more detailed versions of this plan, and it is even worse than this. But this is just a kind of top line for people, so you know what we're talking about in this next segment. This was from 2020. So remember, this is when everybody was locked down. This is when we didn't know it was coming. And this plan and this deal was rushed through, I believe, in the period of a week. Right. So the communities really did not have like the ability to speak up or to challenge this deal because, of course, Tesla's, saying we're going to have all these different places we could potentially go, despite the fact that Musk was already sort of here and is making very clear that he was going to be in Austin. Pretty disappointing, honestly, and embarrassing, as bad as it is here, to see what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with the way that they tried to entice him to come over there. But we don't have time to do that right now. Let's read this first bit. Amid a frog drowning on Sunday, which is a great little turn of phrase, several dozen members of the Austin Tesla Club gathered jubilantly in a parking lot in East Austin. Masked fans cheered as a middle-aged man flashed the Bevo with one hand and fired a flamethrower with the other. The crowd was there to celebrate the deal between Travis County and the electric car manufacturer inked late last week to build a $1.1 billion 2,000-acre factory named Giga Texas in the tiny municipality of Del Valle near Austin Bergstrom International Airport. And let me just get to the details of this, because it is something else. This is the first sweetheart deal that they got, and probably one of the most damaging was from the Del Valle Independent School District. As they note here, which received a C under the state's letter rating system, played an integral role in wooing the electric car manufacturer. The incentive agreement, in Tesla's case, the incentive agreement allows the company to cap its property value at $80 million. This is a property $1.1 billion that is valued at $1.1 billion. They are capping the property tax value of it for $80 million. That is money being taken out of that school system. That is money being taken out of kids' education, as opposed to its $1.1 billion valuation, meaning that Tesla will pay just $776,000 a year in property taxes for the first 10 years.
What's that worth? That's nothing.
No,
I mean,
as opposed, wait for the next bit, Matt, as opposed to the more than $5 million it would pay without that tax break. The Tesla property's current tenant, a gravel mining facility, pays just $6,400 in property taxes. And few of the children of Tesla employees will attend school in Del Valle, whose population is about $17,000. No doubt about it, right? So what happens with that community? You see a massive increase. You see people getting essentially kicked out of their homes. The jobs, I don't want to spoil the interview because the jobs that are being promised there are unfortunately like not that impressive. And again, you're taking out all of this money, millions of dollars from a school system that really, really could use it to better the future for these kids. In other negotiations, this isn't in this piece, but Tesla has said that like, oh, well, we'll have some kind of after school program and like, we'll send some people to talk to these kids. I would much rather $5 million be going into the coffers of our public schools here than having Tesla do some bullshit after school program. But this is the bit that's notable because we're not talking about Del Valle's school system in this next interview, but this is Travis County. Travis County will give Tesla an additional property tax rebates worth $14 million over 10 years. If Tesla were to spend more in operational costs than $1.1 billion proposed, the company's subsidies would only increase a 75. This is the really crazy part about it. If Tesla were to spend more in operational costs than the $1.1 billion, the company's subsidies would only increase a 75% tax break for any spending between $1.1 billion and $2 billion, an 80% break for spending above $2 billion, right? This is why this is, again, not unique to this area. This happens all across the country where corporations pit people and government authorities against each other so that they can get these kind of sweetheart deals. It is so damaging to communities. This is money that is coming out of children's education. This is money that should be being utilized to pay for the services that Tesla is going to be using and to improve the services of the overall community, right? If you want to be somebody who celebrates these big corporations coming into your community, you should want those corporations to be making sure that the roads, that the trash systems, that all of these kind of things that our tax money goes into funding is being fully funded by these corporations. The fact that Tesla was able to get this deal is an absolute disgrace, in my opinion. I'm really excited to share this conversation that we have with Bob Libal about his vision, and I highly, highly suggest that people check out his campaign if you're in the area, and if you aren't, I highly suggest considering donating as well.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of that Tyson plant that those people in Kansas opposed because it's ridiculous that you're taking money out of people's out of schools, like $750,000, nothing, man. Like you try to operating a school budget.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, ridiculous, absolutely disgusting. So yeah, here's this interview, and are we coming back after this, or are we going to see people?
We can come back and say bye.
Cool, sounds good. I'll see you folks in about 20 minutes.
Welcome back, Left for Reckoners. David Griscom here. Matt is AWOL, but I'm very, very lucky to be joined this afternoon by Bob Libal, who is running here in Travis County for the Travis County Commissioner. I believe District 2. Bob is a civil rights leader, community organizer, who's focused a lot of his work on immigration, mass incarceration, and he's also the former executive director of the Grassroots Leadership. I'm really looking forward to hearing his vision for Travis County. How's it going, Bob?
Good. Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm really thrilled. I mean, this is a really interesting race, and it's an interesting position. I mean, a lot of people probably aren't too familiar with what the Travis County Commissioner does or what that position is, but I think this is a really that's an important position for people here in Austin and Travis County in general. But this is one of those things where it's really important to understand how power works in your community and who are making these really, really big decisions that affect a lot of people. But, could you just give people kind of brief breakdown of what that position is and why it's something that's actually very important for working class politics, people in the working class to be paying attention to?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Commissioner's Court, right, it's not a court, right, in Texas. The Commissioner's Court is like the governing body for the county, right? So it's like the the equivalent of the city council for the county. And, they're responsible for things like roads and bridges in the county, but they're also responsible for the budget for the entirety of the criminal justice system, which is actually the majority of what the county does. 60% or so of the budget of Travis County goes to prosecutors, goes to the jail, goes to defenders, and then goes to like sheriff's deputies and constables, right? So as a criminal justice reform advocate, it's incredibly important, right? Because it's funding essentially the entire criminal legal apparatus outside of like your local Austin Police Department. And there's been a lot of fights at Travis County in over some of the big criminal justice reform initiatives. And then as we're talking about, essentially how do we reimagine what safety looks like for communities, it's incredibly important, right? One of the big fights is whether or not we go down a path. There's sort of this consultant-driven study done in 2017 before we passed the Freedom City policy in Austin, before we elected Jose Garza as our district attorney, before a bunch of criminal justice reforms have reduced our jail population pretty significantly, that called for us basically tearing down our jails and rebuilding $600 million worth of new jails in Travis County. And the criminal justice reform advocates and others have said, let's take a step back, right, and actually figure out what our community needs. Maybe we actually need mental health and substance use treatment facilities outside of the jail, right? Maybe we need things like violence interruption programs. Maybe we need things like a bigger investment in public housing, right? As things that keep people out of jail in the first place, rather than simply, reinvesting in the system of mass incarceration. So that's been one of the big animating factors in our race.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I want to talk a little bit more in a second about, what can be done specifically with this position, but just for people, who aren't familiar with you and your work, I mean, what is your motivation in getting into this side of politics? I know you've been a community organizer for a long time, but running for office is a different kind of game.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely nothing I ever thought that I would do. My role has always been pushing the progressive policies and then organizing community around it. But it was really this fight over the jail that pushed me in. And, essentially seeing how the big fight last summer was over the first step in that master plan, which is building a women's jail, right, in Travis County. And seeing how the community mobilized to delay that for 1 year, but also how, our current leadership was not welcoming of that kind of input, right? It was not welcoming of the formerly incarcerated people who were speaking against the jail, right? Of the community organizations, and just seeing, I think at City Council here in Austin, there's been much more community organizing focused at it, but how the county commission, which spends more money actually in the general fund than the city does, right? And it has a bigger impact on things like criminal justice and in some ways economic development, right? Just doesn't have that kind of input. And so we're really running a race to increase the level of engagement of organizing that goes into the county, right? By really mobilizing community organizations and saying that people should have a vested interest in this. So it's not just about, advancing progressive policy. It's also about expanding who has a voice in the decisions that really impact our community.
Yeah, because I mean, I like that a lot, and I think that as like a left movement, as a progressive movement, as members of DSA organizations like that, not just saying that we don't just want to get people elected into office. We want to expand access to those kind of positions of power, and the commission. Make some very big decisions. I mean, one, obviously, as you were talking about when it comes to mass incarceration for the community, but also when it comes to attracting or basically giving big tax breaks to, certain kind of wealthy corporations, right? And that's not really a process that is extremely transparent or really incorporating too many working class people from Austin right now, is it?
Yeah, not at all. I mean, I think our current county judge, Andy Brown, is doing a good job of trying to at least say what's coming up at the commission, right? But I mean, historically, there's been essentially no input even to the budget, right? I mean, you show up to the budget hearings and there's basically no one even knows what Travis County is doing. And the what you're referencing, right, is the $14 million in tax breaks that Travis County gave to Tesla, right, to move their gigafactory here, which sort of precipitated the move of the Tesla headquarters here. And by all accounts, the county just got played, right? I mean, they broke ground the next week on the factory. All the people who do the actual research on whether these subsidies are active say that in 85 to 90% of the cases, the company was already going to move here anyways, right? That it's just kind of extracting resources from the public, right? And in this case, to subsidize literally the world's richest man. And I think it's also worth noting that this was done in the summer of 2020, right? This is during the protests over, our national reckoning over racism in the criminal justice system following the murder of George Floyd, when we're in the midst of the worst of the pandemic and the economic meltdown that it's caused. So while the county struggled to get its rental assistance program up, it rushed the process to give Elon Musk tax breaks. And to me, that over the objections, right, of organized labor and community organizations like the Workers' Defense Project, who said, if we're going to do this, let's at least slow it down, right? And develop a process by which we can ensure that these are good jobs with occupational safety, right, regulations baked into it, right, where we have third-party oversight, all the things that you would want in any kind of agreement. And instead, we rushed it over the objections of organized labor and those community organizations and got it done in a couple of weeks because Elon Musk was threatening to move to Tulsa. And, I think looking back on it, that feels a little bit like, a middle schooler talking about their Canadian girlfriend, right? Was Elon Musk really going to move to Tulsa, Oklahoma? Probably not, right? But he did get $14 million of public tax breaks out of the deal. For jobs that start at $35,000 a year, right? The fast food taco place around the corner from me is paying $33,500 or something like that to start, right? So these aren't exactly jobs that are living wage jobs for people trying to make it in a city that's so quickly becoming unaffordable.
Well, I mean, that's the thing about this Tesla deal that is so frustrating is, one, the timing of when it was pushed through, two, how quickly it was done, and three, at a certain point, you're just taking these companies at their word. And that's one thing. And this is not unique to Travis County, but this is all across the country now, where whatever the relevant body is just accepts they're saying they're going to bring, 1,000 jobs here and they're all going to be paying this much. And that doesn't typically pan out. And even if it does, should the county be subsidizing, as you were saying, these extremely well-off companies when there is an affordability crisis? I mean, could you talk about that as well? I mean, your personal feelings on what's been happening in the region and in Austin over this, past couple of decades, honestly, when it comes to affordability, in particular parts of the eastern parts of Austin and the eastern parts of the county.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the thing that we hear over and over again as we're knocking doors, right? Is that people are afraid that they're not going to be able to afford to continue to live here. I think it's hard to envision how people like my son, right, and other middle and working class kids are going to be able to grow up here. We're really in danger of losing the ability for, regular folks to live in our community. And, we're the folks that make this place the interesting, vibrant, creative place that people love, right? And if, all of us have to be, have to move to the exurbs, right? Can't even afford to live in the edges of the city, right? We're going to lose everything that we love about this community. And I think that as we knock doors, people see that, and feel that really tangibly. And when we talk about Tesla moving here, right, I think that, that anxiety is just huge right now in Austin. I think that people are really afraid that we're going to become, if we are not already, right, the next, San Francisco or Silicon Valley, right, where, working people drive in for hours, where public school teachers can't afford, a place within, 100 miles of where they work. And so one of the things we're saying, in addition to not giving mega corporations and the world's richest people tax breaks, is that the county needs an affordability in the housing plan, right? Complete with a housing and affordability director position at the county that needs to be based so that we're coordinating things like our rental assistance, our anti-displacement programming, right? The funding to the courts that evict people, right? We should not have, on one hand, a court evicting people, and on the other hand, our rental assistance program that isn't being able to disperse funds quickly enough or effectively enough to prevent those evictions. One of the other candidates running on the DSA slate is Andrew Hairston, who's running for JP1 on an anti-eviction platform, right? So I think really working in concert with organizations like BASTA and the Austin Tenants Council, right, and groups like DSA, to build momentum on these issues so that we are building a resistance to this kind of this anti-affordability crisis that we're all facing in our community.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to note too, because one thing, the affordability crisis is unfortunately like a national crisis. Yeah. It's really bad here, though. It's really bad here. Yeah. And I just want to note to folks who aren't from around here or anything like that, it's like, one thing that I've always loved about being from here, and I've always loved about this community, is that, Austin has always been a really great safe haven for people to come to. It's been a fairly welcoming place for people to come to. So not really trying to say that, like, the problem is that people are coming here. It's more the question of, like, how are we going to do this in a sustainable way that doesn't come off of the backs of, working class people, and particularly the communities of color that have been, ignored for far too long in politics in Texas, and particularly in progressive politics, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Right. I am absolutely not a person who says don't move to Austin. Right. There are some of us who are from here. Right. But most of us, right, have moved here at one point or the other. And it is, the part of what has attracted interesting and creative and unique people to Austin, right, is the fact that you have been able to afford to live here, right? And I think that it is obviously, a national and an international trend of things becoming unaffordable because of heightening inequality, right? And so I think that one of the other things that the county needs to do, right, and that we all need to be doing is using the bully pulpit and all of the levers that we have, right, to increase union density, to ensure that, all of our jobs, right, are keeping up with wages that allow people to be able to live in this community. Last year, Travis County employees got a 3% raise or a 3.5% raise, I think. And that was heralded as like the best that they've gotten in years. Now, inflation was 6%. Housing costs in Austin, depending on how you measure it, went up like 20 or 40%, right? So, clearly we're not keeping up, right? And so I think that, using every direct power that the county has to be increasing wages, and also the indirect power that elected officials have to be able to, shame companies like Tesla, right? Who are paying not a living wage, right? At a facility that we got tax breaks for. It's not a living wage, at least if you're trying to raise a kid, right? In this community, right? To be using that bully pulpit for union density, right? And for increasing wages and benefits across the board.
I'll just say to listeners, again, if you're not from here, the Tesla deal, not just on the Travis County side, but with almost every entity that negotiated with them is frankly a criminal. And probably need to do a deep dive in that to break it down for people, because it's quite shocking. But in the last couple of minutes, This is a big part of this project, and just sort of thinking about how we want to engage with politics, particularly elected officials. Could you sort of map out? I mean, you were talking about other people, who are running on the DSA slate. But, how do you envision yourself if you're in this position? How do you envision sort of interacting with the community, but in particular interacting with organizations like DSA and other kind of elected officials who sort of share a kind of world and political view with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's been the work that I've done my whole life, right? Is the sort of community organizing and building capacity, particularly in the communities that have been most impacted by mass incarceration and immigration detention and deportation. And that's how I envision, right, having having an office at Travis County, right? That it would be the movement office at Travis County, where community organizations, where folks like DSA, and where regular working folks, right, can envision themselves having a home and having a space in which they can move the issues that are important to them, right, and have an advocate on the commission. And in many ways, it's very inaccessible, right, Travis County. Unlike the city council, where you'll often have the meetings are in the evening, right, where you'll often have community organizations mobilize dozens of people to testify. That very rarely happens at Travis County. There's been a couple of incidents over the last couple of years where the criminal justice reform community or like the tenants' rights groups have organized, but generally there's very few people that are paying attention, and we want to change that, right? So through things like ensuring that everyone knows what's coming up, through participatory budget processes, through making sure that agendas and documents are translated into the languages that are most spoken in our community, other than English.
Yes,
we've translated our website into Spanish, but we've had folks show up to testify, and the county judge, who's like our mayor, has called up a staff member to interpret, right? And that's just like horrible practice, right? We should have the ability for people who speak languages other than English to be able to testify in front of our governing bodies in, this world-class community that we have. I think like really envisioning a more engaged, right, community. I think that's basic progressive politics, right? Like we should be bringing in people who've been excluded from the processes, and certainly working with folks like Andrew. Greg Casar has been a good friend and a champion of so many of our issues on the city council. Hopefully he'll be our congressperson. I think that there's a really good sort of slate of DSA candidates and other progressive candidates here in Austin and Travis County. And a lot of that is because the movement has been built here, right? The sort of the groundwork has been laid for community organizing and electoral politics in a way that is really unique, I think, and really speaks very highly of our for our city.
Absolutely, and I'm very excited. Well, Bob, how can people get involved and donate?
Yeah, bobforcommish.com is the website, and it's Bob for Commish on all the social media channels. So we would love that if people can get engaged. The election is March 1st, and early voting starts on Valentine's Day, so we're really in crunch time. We're knocking literally thousands of doors as we speak. So you can sign up on the website. Certainly donations are really appreciated so that they can pay. We're the only we're the only campaign in the race with a labor peace agreement. We have living wages for all of our campaign workers. So donations are very much appreciated so that we can pay people to go out and knock doors. But we're also doing text banks, postcards, phone banks over the next few weeks. So you can sign up to get involved that way as well.
Well, that sounds great. Well, Bob, I really appreciate you taking the time this afternoon, and people should definitely check out the website.
All right. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.